Venom is about to become one of the most powerful beings in existence, and this story is nuts. Check this out. So what this does is this initially opens up with Eddie Brock basically landing in a place that's beyond seemingly everything in existence. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out here is that Marvel did have a garbage crossover called Dark Web. That basically dealt with the symbiote, really more than like Eddie Brock. Eddie Brock himself and the symbiote were basically separated. This is where Eddie Brock went to. So what he ends up doing is kind of waking up in what is this sort of just ethereal, giant pool-like place. And this disembodied voice kind of keeps talking to him, right? Just sort of offering this explanation. And what it does is it just kind of manifests in the form of a physical hand. And what it does is it tells Eddie, you are in the unbion, right? The antithesis of Omega, the heart of the hive, the true home of the King in Black. But this is not a throne room, Eddie. This is an engine room. It's where we do our work. Now, this is particularly important, right? Because what this does is it puts forward this idea that there doesn't seem to be that much differentiation between the King in Black and the White Phoenix of the Crown, the White Hot Room. The reason why I say that is because before Grant Morrison's X-Men run and New X-Men, all we really had was just the Phoenix Force, and it was just really, really powerful. But what he did is he introduced in a story called Here Comes Tomorrow, the White Hot Room, right? The White Phoenix of the Crown. Now, technically the White Hot Room goes all the way back to Chris Claremont's run, but the idea is that the Phoenix exists beyond all space and time, in this place where it quote unquote works from. And that seems to be a lot of the similarity that goes on here. Literally the hand says, so tell me the work that needs doing. Tell me what road led you here. Ask me your question. And the first thing Eddie Brock does is he asks about Dylan, right? He asks about his son, who's the current host of the Venom symbiote. And of course, he gets this small little glimpse where he basically sees his son Dylan just beating the crap out of the Gold Goblin, right? Norman Osborn, which is kind of cool, but it's just a momentary glimpse, and that's all you really get. And so it tells Eddie, you have 4 more questions to ask. Ask me your questions. And Eddie asks about Meridius, right? He's why I'm here. What do I need to stop him? Now, for those of you guys who were catching up with the Venom stories, one of the things we learned is that after Eddie Brock became the King in Black and seemingly quote unquote died, that what he did is he woke up in this place that was completely and totally housed all the symbiotes in existence, that had just kind of been turned into this kind of futuristic, or I guess almost afterlife type landscape. The whole place was ran by Meridius, and there were these differing versions of the Venom symbiote that existed there. What we found out in that story, or at least over the course of that run, is that Meridius is almost Eddie's final form, and the other versions of the Venom symbiote are all the different stages that Eddie Brock will go through along the road to being the King in Black. So for example, the all-red symbiote called Bedlam, that's the form that Eddie Brock takes when his anger gets the better of him, right? So on and so forth. But one of the things he had learned in his time in both fighting and learning about Meridius is there was another symbiote beyond Meridius himself. That if Meridius is a 6th form, there was a 7th form symbiote out there. This is what he was talking about. This is what he was speculating about. And so what the hand says is it says, don't waste this. You've known that answer all along. And the response of Eddie is, I need my other, right? I need both my son and I need Venom. And the response of the hand is, of course you do. The question is, how far will you go to reach them? And that's when Eddie kind of gives the response you would expect from a father. I would go to the ends of the earth. I would do whatever it is that I have to do. And so that's when the hand asks him, why do you remember the garden so vividly, Eddie, right? That was the place where all the different symbiotes and Meridius were at. And the response of Eddie is, it was a graveyard, right? The corpse of every other symbiote in existence that ever lived, shaped into a soulless plastic shell. And the question that the hand asks is that all it is to you? The scene of a crime? And the response of Eddie is the scene of my crime, right? Because again, he eventually becomes Meridius, and Meridius was the one who made all that, right? Meridius stripped all those symbiotes in existence of their own minds. He literally broke and shattered their minds and turned them into what were basically soulless husks, and then in turn reformed them to create the garden, right? That massive place where all the different symbiotes reside and just kind of make up this giant landscape. And so Eddie says, I want a question that I don't know the answer to, so here it is. What is the purpose of a power like this? What does it achieve? Who does it serve? What is the King in Black for? Now, this is the question that Marvel comic fans have been asking since the beginnings of it all, right? Since the very beginning of everything, ever since the start of Donny Cates' run, the introduction of Knull, the symbiote god, all that kind of stuff. Was Knull just a guy who was there and he was just an explanation for the origin of the symbiotes and like that was it? Or is there something more? What Al Ewing does here, really I think it's more Ram V than Al Ewing, but like what he does here, what they do is they basically offer this huge explanation. And what the hand says is that there are 2 dominant philosophies when it comes comes to magic, there's light magicians who work from closed-off sanctums and lofty towers, affecting the world from a place outside and above it, an approach that demands a certain self-denial of the kind that sometimes builds heroes, but not always. And then the hand goes as far as to say, there are dark magicians who work from the streets and gutters, changing the world from its broken heart, a path that can create a taste for worldly power and thus build villains, but not always. Now, the reason why the hand keeps saying this, not always, is because just because a being is operating with an insane level of power from the outside and is what we would call a person that practices white magic, does not mean they are inherently going to become a superhero. That when it comes to just these insane levels of power, there isn't really a good guy or a bad guy. There are people who achieve insane levels of power from virtue of being what we would call good magic, and they become villains. And there are people who have black magic and they become heroes, right? There's no absolute truth here. And it even says that there is no inherent moral superiority in either approach. He says because both are reflections of entities far above and far below, far beyond. You have come via limbo, the earth plane's dark opposite, to the black engine where the work is done. But there is another engine tended to by other cosmic entities operating on cosmic scales from their cosmic sanctum, believing they can control everything from outside everything. These we call the Ivory Kings, the Lords of Wild Space, the Beyonders. This is huge, dude. Okay, here's the thing. So what this does is it basically says that the King in Black is the opposite of the Beyonders. And this is enormous. It's nuts, right? So here's the reason why this is so important. Here's the reason why this is so important. So what this does is it puts out this idea that with the Beyonders themselves, right, getting into this history, God, I love the Beyonders. Getting into this history, right, the Beyonders were originally just like some enigmatic race. And initially there was only ever one, right? Secret Wars 1984, there's like a crack in space with light shining through, and it says, I am from beyond, basically fight to the death, and whoever wins, I'll make your wildest dreams come true. And so that was all we really had. Even when you got into Secret Wars 2, it was still just the Beyonder. The reason why that's so important though is because once you get into Jonathan Hickman's, oh my God, Jonathan Hickman's Avengers and New Avengers, God, it's the greatest comic book story ever told. But what we got were like the Beyonders as a race, and that the original Beyonder from Secret Wars was basically a child. Over the years, the Beyonders have been adjusted, changed, modified, and actually been evolved into higher states with a more grandiose purpose. But the thing is that the King in Black are the opposite of that. Now, in order to be the opposite, you kind of have to be equal to it, right? Equal but opposite. So the idea here is that Eddie Brock as the King in Black, with this person being his final form, he says this, the Kings in Black are their opposite numbers. Ivory Kings do their work outside the world. Onyx Kings work from within it. And thus, you are bound by the world, working not through the clean, precise energies of concordance, but through organic matter, wet, messy goo, working with the universe in symbiosis. But the work is the same. You have to maintain, Eddie Brock, you, nobody else. Keep the train on the rails, keep the plane in the air, keep the whole show running, or give up and embrace the eternal end. And the statement Eddie Brock makes is Knull. And the response of the hand is yes, exactly like Knull. And the response of Eddie is to deny it, right? To say like, this is not right, this is not fair, this is not what I asked for. And the response of the hand is Knull said the same thing. And the response of Eddie is it's insane. It should be somebody who can handle it. I'm not the right guy. The hand says Knull said the same. And the response of Eddie is you don't understand. I don't want this job, this work. The cosmos should have given it to somebody who did want it, who could do it. Why me? Why does it have to be me? Knull said the same thing. So here's the cool thing behind all this, and this is why this is so awesome, because when Donny Cates originally introduced Knull the symbiote god in Marvel Comics, he just appeared like a straight up villain, right? That somewhere along the line, the Celestials had basically started crafting everything in existence, the planets, stars, solar systems, galaxies, the whole nine yards, and had quote unquote encroached on the territory of Knull, who was a god of the abyss, right? Nothingness, the absence of existence. And a war broke out between Knull and the Celestials, if you want to call it a war. Knull, of course, overcame one of the Celestials, which is where the Celestial head of Nowhere comes from. He chopped that Celestial's head off using his own sword, and then of course the Celestials sealed Knull away. But what this does is it turns the entire thing on its head. That what seems to happen here is that every universe has its own King in Black, and much like Galactus and Franklin Richards merging together at the end of all things and being reborn as a new cosmic entity in whatever universe comes next, that the current King in Black will be reborn into the next universe, either in his current form as just a kind of continuation, or as potentially somebody new, and that Knull the symbiote god was the original King in Black before the current universe came into existence, but the previous King in Black before Knull spilled the truth to him about what it truly means to be a King in Black, and much like Eddie Brock, he rejected it, didn't want to have any part of it, and ultimately seemed to walk away from it. And that's where the conflict between the Celestials and Knull came from, because what ends up happening, as the hand says, the Beyonders got the easy job, kings in pristine white gloves, keeping their hands clean. Our hands get dirty, get bloody, our hearts get torn and broken. Being a King in Black hurts Eddie, and in a time before time, a space before space, Knull could not handle that. When the Celestials found him, they were not coming into his void to attack him, they were coming to recruit him. They were coming to give him a job. Knull rejected it and waged war against the Celestials instead. It changes everything we know about Knull the symbiote god, why he did what he did. He wasn't really a villain. If anything, he was more of a victim. He was a guy who ultimately signed on for a level of power that he didn't know what he was getting into, right? And he rejected it, and then all hell broke loose with regards to him and the Celestials and seemingly everything in existence. Now, the response of Eddie here is, this should have gone to Spider-Man instead. Spider-Man would have been able to handle this. And the response of the hand is, Spider-Man was born for this role, but life happened, and he's not here, and you are. You bought the ticket, Eddie. Somebody has to take the ride. Now, here's why that's so important. Peter Parker was the one who originally gained the Venom symbiote, right? In Secret Wars, 1984, Peter Parker came across the symbiote. Not fully understanding what it was, he bonded to it. And it wasn't until he got back to Earth and he was like basically traveling around the city in his sleep with a symbiote controlling his body, attacking villains, being more of a vigilante than anything else. And so Peter Parker goes to a bell tower, he casts the symbiote off, the symbiote out of anger bonds itself to Eddie Brock, and the rest is history. So ultimately, this was supposed to be Spider-Man. It's how things were supposed to play out, but it didn't. Peter Parker cast off the symbiote before he could even learn what it meant to be bonded to the symbiote in the first place, of basically becoming the opposite and equal in power of the Beyonders, and ultimately this role now went to Eddie Brock instead. And so Eddie kind of makes this offhanded statement where he says Meridius didn't want to take the ride either, did he? And when the hand asks him, is that your fourth question? The response of Eddie is not quite. When I say Meridius didn't want this, it's that he didn't want to be you. So who are you? Give me the long answer. And the hand kind of pauses for a second and says, smart thinking. You already know the short answer. I'm you. I'm Eddie Brock, but I'm so much more than that. Call me the Eventuality. And he says Knull is a straight line. He tries to destroy everything. He fails, and that's his timeline over with. The timeline of the true King in Black for this reality is more complicated. Eddie Brock takes the throne, meaning Eddie Brock gets the symbiote for the first time, and then everything transpires. He defeats Knull, and then he becomes a King in Black. And he says, and unlike his opposites in the Beyond, he's non-linear, unstuck in time. Your path has already forked once. During that moment of decision in limbo, it will fork again and again. And he says, you will travel back and forth, hither and yon, restless, rootless, into forgotten pasts, into possible futures. You'll lose this power, you'll regain it, you'll lose it again. That will happen, and it won't. Already did and already didn't. From here, I can see the whole map, the whole maze. So many choices you make from here, Eddie, so many paths, and every single one of them leads to me. When after far longer than your cosmos will last, your work in the world is finally done, you come here to supervise. So what this basically means here, right? Those of you guys who are familiar with the multiverse, every universe is a possibility based off the main Marvel universe, right? So let's wind the clock back to when Eddie Brock first got the symbiote, right? So the main Marvel universe timeline is Peter Parker casts off the symbiote in Web of Spider-Man number 45, Eddie Brock gets the symbiote instead, right? What the hand is saying is it's saying no matter what happens, you will always end up here. So say for example, Spider-Man casts off the Venom symbiote and it just happened to be that like Iron Man was there. The symbiote would bond itself to Iron Man, and then things would transpire. Maybe the symbiote leaves Iron Man and it bonds itself to Captain America, things would transpire, and then it would ultimately bond to Eddie Brock. This was always going to happen. No matter how things transpire for Eddie, he will always end up there. And that's why it says that your timeline has forked and will continue to fork. There are an infinite number of possibilities for you, Eddie Brock. You could have died to Knull, but somehow you would have returned and somehow you would have become the King in Black. No matter what happens, you always end up here. And when Eddie asks, what do you mean by supervise, the response of the hand is a little prodding here and there, like I'm doing now, keeping a whole Venomverse of kings in black on the rails so we don't get another Knull. Or maybe we do. When this cosmos ends and the new one begins, I will be there, renewed by the cosmic void, awaiting to greet a new king in black. Maybe I'll be the next king in black, the bad guy, the fire that tempers my replacement. Or maybe I'll just be a guy on Earth and I'll buy a Maserati. Either way, I plan to enjoy my retirement. And so when Eddie says, meanwhile, I'm the sap stuck on your factory floor, the response of the hand is, we're all stuck, Eddie. All the iterations of me, everybody's stuck in their lives. That's what broke Meridius, what caused all of this. And the response of Eddie is, what causes you, right? This is what causes you. And so this is one of the biggest moments here, because what Eddie says is he says, you're what I become, one way or another, or 100 other ways besides. I get that. What I don't get is what I am now. Eddie Brock's body is a charred skeleton in a morgue someplace. So what's standing here instead? And the response of the hand is a loner. You needed something to wear. And the response of Eddie is no riddles, no glimpses. I'm asking my last question. My body's gone. This thing I'm wearing has to be a goo construct of some kind, but it's real. My scalp itches, my eye stings, my back's aching this whole time. How can that be? If I do not have a physical body, then how can I feel like this physical body is real? What am I? And the response of the hand is more than you think. You've got a power in you that can save your son, save your other, maybe save everything that is, if you just let yourself see it. Your son is half human, half symbiote. He got there the easy way. He was born, but you had to take the back road. You died and your mind jumped, seeking out a body that belonged to you, that fell under your jurisdiction. So with that knowledge, you jumped to the garden, a place made of dead symbiote flesh. So is that the only dead flesh in all of time and space that's yours? Let me spill it out for you, Eddie. You have absolute power over any flesh you command. And while symbiote bodies are shared among all the kings in black, the human body of Eddie Brock at the time that you inhabit it is yours alone. That in effect, what it's saying is that yes, you have control over all symbiotes in existence, but it's not as simple as you command them and tell them what to do. You are a fully functional symbiote. You are a human being in symbiote form, or a symbiote in human being form. You can bring yourself back from the dead at any point in time. You can take on any form you want to. You're a living, breathing symbiote, Eddie. You are nigh indestructible, channeling a level of power that you couldn't possibly begin to comprehend. While Eddie is the opposite in his role of the Beyonders, he's seemingly equal in power. He can manipulate and control all things in existence. He can literally move anywhere he wants throughout the time stream. Eddie Brock is, by all standards of measurement, godly powerful. Right now, this is particularly important here because what Eddie Brock does is, in realizing this, takes on his actual full form, which is basically the Venom symbol across his chest, which looks dope. But I'm excited about this because, as you guys know right now, Avengers Beyond is a thing, and Marvel's building up to like this whole new godly pantheon being written by Jonathan Hickman. Eddie Brock seems to basically become a new cosmic entity. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.